Hello student, we are going to study experimental techniques in physics first. In that we started our first chapter, that is signal analysis and sensors. In that we started the second part, that is the chapter has two parts. First is the signal analysis and second is the sensors. We started with the second part, that is the sensor, and in our previous videos we will discuss about what do you mean by sensors and seen some sensor characteristics. Now in this video we will see remaining sensor characteristic. In previous video we seen the 6 sensor characteristics. First is the accuracy, second is the precision, third is the linearity, fourth is the repeatability, fifth is the reproducibility, and sixth one is the sensitivity of the sensor. These are all 6 characteristics we have been seen in our previous video. Now the remaining characteristics are the resolution, threshold, drift, stability, tolerance, range, and hysteresis. These all are the remaining characteristics which will be discussed in this video. So start with the 7th characteristic, that is resolution. The resolution is the minimum change or smallest increment in the measured value that can be detected with certainty by the sensor. And what do you mean by resolution? The resolution is the smallest change or smallest increment within the measured value. Measured value, that means the input which is given to the sensor. That means the small change in that input so that it can be detected by using the sensor. That means the sensor says that the minimum change in the input and detected with the certainty. This is known as the resolution of the sensor. We know that suppose we consider the temperature sensor. The temperature sensor has ability to sense the temperature, the minimum change in the temperature. That means if we change the temperature by 0.1 degree Celsius, then the sensor senses that temperature, that is the minimum temperature or the smallest increment in that temperature. The sensor is able to sense that minimum change, and this is nothing but the resolution. It can be least count of the sensor. We know that what do you mean by the least count? Least count means the minimum value that can be measured with the help of instrument. That is, suppose we consider the scale, that is the scale with the help of we can measure the length, that means the our scale, and on that the least count of that scale is the 0.1 centimeter. That means we are able to measure the length with the increment of 0.1 centimeter. That is the least count of that scale is the 0.1 centimeter. And this is the resolution, that means the minimum change in the input value or a smallest increment that can be detected by using the sensor. Resolution is the number of parts that the output or displayed reading from a sensor can be broken down into without any instability in the signal or reading. That means there is a smallest increment of the output value displayed in the output value. That means if we change input with the smallest increment, and this change reflects in the output, that means the number of parts that the output or displaying reading, and this is without instability. That means this sensor gives a stable output, there is no fluctuation, and this is the resolution. Now if we consider the example of the mercury thermometer. A typical mercury thermometer will have a resolution of 1 degree Celsius, but typical digital thermometer will have a resolution of 0.1 degree Celsius. If we consider the analog mercury thermometer, then it is able to measure the temperature, that is minimum temperature, which is the 1 degree Celsius. And if we consider the digital thermometer, which is able to measure the minimum temperature, that is 0.1 degree Celsius. That means the resolution of that mercury thermometer. The analog mercury thermometer has a resolution of 1 degree Celsius, and that of digital thermometer will have a resolution of 0.1 degree Celsius. This is about the resolution. Resolution is very important characteristics for the sensor, for the input. Okay. Now the next characteristic is the threshold. Threshold is defined as the range of different input minimum values over which there is no change in the output value. That means if we provide the range of minimum input values, for that sensor there is no change in the output. That means sensor does not sense that values, and this range or this different input minimum values is known as the threshold of that sensor. Suppose we consider the example of diode. We know that the knee voltage of the diode is a 0.7 volt. When we provide the voltage to the diode responds or turn on if and only if the voltage is a 0.7 volt, otherwise the diode will be off. This is the threshold of that diode, that is the knee voltage or threshold voltage for the diode, which is the 0.7 volt. This minimum value defines the threshold of the sensor. That means that minimum value, so that the sensor sense, is known as the threshold of that sensor. It is also known as a dead space, dead band or dead zone. That means if we provide the minimum input voltage or the range of the minimum input voltage, but for that range the sensor does not respond or there is no output, so that zone or that band or that space is known as the dead zone or dead band or dead space. This is the threshold characteristics of the sensor. Now next characteristic is the drift. The duration for which even if the input is applied to the sensor there is no output is called as drift. That means the duration for which even if we apply the input to the sensor there is no output. That means this is the period over which the sensor does not give any output even if we apply the input. That means there is this occurs due to some change in the physical parameter, suppose temperature or some fluctuation in the parameters, or if change the sensitivity of the sensor. Due to this there is no output even if we apply the input. That is, drift is the variation in the output of an instrument, that is sensor, from the desired value for a given input due to change in sensitivity and interfacing inputs like a temperature, component instabilities, etc. This is the variation or deviation in the output of the instrument because of the some parameters, that is the temperature, humidity, component instability. Due to all that parameter there is a change in the output of that instrument. So this is the drift. Now drift is also very important properties of sensor. Now next characteristics is the stability. It is the ability of a sensor to retain its performance throughout its specified operating life. That means if we measure the particular physical quantity on some sensors or on a particular sensor, the sensor will give output same when we measure now, and if we measure this particular measurement or perform the particular measurement after some days or after some month, the sensor should give the same value. That is the stability of the sensor. There is no fluctuation in the output of that sensor. That means if we perform experiment right now, it will give the same value when we perform the experiment after some days or after some month. That is the stable output. This is the stability characteristic of the sensor. Stability gives the performance of the sensor. That means with the help of stability we are able to judge or we are able to consider the performance of the sensor. If stability is good, then the performance of the sensor is better, and if the stability is poor, then the performance of sensor is not satisfactory. That means if there is a fluctuation in the output value, that is there is no stability in the output, then the performance of the sensor is not satisfactory or bad. And if the stability in the sensor, if the stability, if the there is a stable in the, if there is a stability in the output, that is the there is no fluctuation in the output, then the sensor is a good, or stability is a good of that sensor. And if the fluctuation in the output, then the performance of the sensor is not satisfactory, so the stability is bad of that sensor. This is about the stability, and stability is a very important property in a measurement, because when stability is good, then we are able to measure the physical quantity with accuracy. This is the stability. Now next characteristic is the tolerance. The maximum allowable error in the measurement is specified in terms of the sum value, which is called tolerance. That is, it is the allowable error, maximum allowable error in the measurement is specified in terms of some values. Suppose we consider the measurement of resistance. We know that if we see the resistance, there is a silver or gold ring on the resistance, and this indicates the maximum allowable error in that resistance, or in that resistance measurement. That is, we know that the plus minus 5% or plus minus 10%, which is the maximum allowable error in the resistance measurement. And this is the tolerance. We know that in resistance we have the two values, that is plus minus 5% and plus minus 10%, and we call them as a tolerance. That is the maximum deviation of a manufactured component from some specified value. That means when the instrument is manufactured, that maximum allowable error is specified, particularly specified, so that after performing the experiment or after the measurement, we are able to measure the correct readings, or we get the accuracy in that measurement. That is, it is the term which closely related to the accuracy. That means there is an allowance that error, so that we know that the error and the accuracy, these two quantities are related to each other, therefore the tolerance is also related to the accuracy. If we consider the example, suppose if a project requires a pipe of 12.2 meter in a length, the specified tolerance or allowable variation from that value may be plus minus 100 millimeter. That means if we consider the pipe which is used in our project, and it has a length 12.2 meter, and in that length there is a allowable variation, and the value of this is the plus minus 100 millimeter. That is, the plus minus 100 millimeter is the tolerance in that example. So this is about the tolerance. Now next characteristic is the range. The minimum and maximum value of a quantity for which a sensor is defined to measure, it's called its range. That means sensor is constructed so that it measures the value in particular range, or particular minimum to maximum value range, and this is the range of that sensor. Suppose we consider the temperature sensor, and the temperature sensor is allowed to measure the temperature between certain temperature range, that is the some minimum and some maximum range, or that this sensor operate properly, so that this is the range of that particular sensor. The range of indicating sensor is mostly from 0 to full scale value. Generally the sensor which can measure the value from 0 to maximum range, generally the sensor are constructed in this way. For example, the voltage is 10 to 30 volt, then the range is said to be from 10 to 20 to 30 volt. That means if the voltmeter is able to measure, or any sensor is able to measure from the 10 to 30 volt. Then the range of that sensor is from 10 to 30 volt. That means this sensor measure the voltage in that particular range. And the span is similar to the range, but there is some difference. That is, the span is said to be 20 volt. That is the difference between the maximum, that is the full scale, and the lower scale value. That is 30 minus 10 is 20 volt. Therefore the span is 20 volt. The span is simply difference between the full scale and lower scale value. This is the span, that means the 20 volt, as we see now above. This is about the range of that sensor. That means the sensor is constructed so that they are working in particular range. They are properly working in that particular range. So the range of the sensor is very important. Now the next characteristic, and this is the last characteristics of the sensor, which is the hysteresis. It is the difference between two separate measurements taken at the same point. The first is taking during a series of increasing measurement values, and the other during a series of decreasing measurement values. We know that the hysteresis curve. Suppose we take this particular physical quantity, and if we want to measure that physical quantity, and if we start the measurement at the same point, but if we go through the increasing manner and then again decreasing manner, there is a difference between these two measurement. That is the series of increasing measurement and the series of decreasing measurement. In that we will find some difference, and that difference is known as the hysteresis. Suppose we consider the example of pressure sensor. When a pressure sensor goes from measuring a low pressure to measuring a high pressure, it will give different output than when it goes from a high pressure to low pressure. That means if we measure the pressure with the help of pressure sensor, and first if we measure the pressure from low pressure to high pressure, and after that we measure the pressure from high to low. That means if we go in a reverse way, there is a difference in the output, and that difference is known as the hysteresis. Now most of the sensor shows the hysteresis characteristic. That means if we used a sensor to measure the readings in increasing manner, and then after that also that sensor is used in a decreasing manner, there is a difference between these two measurement, and that difference is the hysteresis. Hysteresis is a characteristic of most sensor. Most of the sensor shows these characteristics, because in many measurements we are measure the values in an increasing manner, and after that in a decreasing manner. So therefore the most of sensor shows this hysteresis characteristics. Now this is all about the sensor characteristics. We have discussed total 13 characteristics of the sensor, and with the help of these 13 parameters or the characteristics of sensor, we are able to study the performance of that sensor, or we are able to judge the sensor is a better or not, so that it will give the proper measurement or not. With the help of these characteristics we will decide it. Therefore the sensor characteristic is very important for the sensor. Now this is all about the sensor characteristics. Now in our next video we will discuss about the sensor classification. That means the sensor is used for the measurement. That is the if we measure temperature, pressure and other parameters such as resistance, voltage, with the help of that we classify the sensor in a different types. That means depending on the measurement of the physical quantities, we classify sensor in a different types, and which we'll discuss in our next video.